This is a bonus episode of the Erasing Shame podcast. On this episode, you will hear a mock counseling session with Asian American therapist Jeanie Chang. Welcome to this special episode of Erasing Shame. I'm thrilled to be with Jeanie Chang, who is a licensed marriage and family therapist in North Carolina. Thank you for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
And this is a very special episode because we want to take you along a mock counseling session. I know for me, I didn't get to see a therapist until the age of 30. And that was only for a brief 4-session introductory assessment. And then I didn't really do therapy work until age 34 because of my Chinese American family background and all the shame and stigma that prevented me from taking my depression more seriously. And I'm high functioning, so I was able to get through life and get grades and work, but my quality of life was definitely diminished looking back. And Jeanie is also the host of Nuna's Nunchi, where she has insightfully brought Korean drama with self-care and therapy. Encourage you to check out that YouTube channel. It'll be in the show notes. And she's also very active as a mental health speaker and on Clubhouse where we chatted, and also with the Asian Mental Health Collective. So really appreciate your work online. And that's how I found you. And I'm stepping into your office and we're going to have a mock session for about 25 minutes. Thank you for making time to chat.
Sure, you're stepping into my virtual office, which is basically what all of us are doing these days, right? Teletherapy for safety reasons. Yeah.
Yes.
Great.
So I was able to find an open slot on your appointment calendar. And I'm not sure what I should be saying here.
Sure.
But I wanted to see a therapist because I'm not in crisis. I'm actually doing pretty well. But from time to time, it's a healthy thing to check in.
Yeah. So I know that as listeners and viewers are watching, then definitely that's usually how some people start. I don't hear often, but you'll hear folks saying, I don't know if this is the right place but I thought like I needed to reach out. And so to validate, then I say, well, I mean, I think you're following your own lead. So that's why you're here. So I'm glad you're here. So I always like to say that. I mean, you still want to say as a therapist, I'm glad you're here, right? To make you feel comfortable. And then my follow-up question to you, GJ, because you just asked, I'm not in crisis, but then I say, well, it's great being proactive. It sounds like you're being proactive with your mental health. So let's talk about what brought you in. What brought you in?
Well, I've worked with therapists for the past 4 years very actively. And I've had to be active with my mental health care because I have a diagnosis of bipolar disorder. I'm still on medication. When I'm in crisis, then I'm seeing my therapist on a weekly basis. But during the quarantine, I've been pretty stable, and I'm very grateful for that. And I haven't seen my therapist for maybe 2 or 3 months now, just because of scheduling. And so I usually don't go that long without checking in, just to see how I'm doing. And sometimes I have a lot of blind spots. And so I don't know how I'm doing until I check in with someone to process my feelings. So I really appreciate the opportunity where I get to just chat with you and see if you have any perspective or insight.
Well, I was going to say, side note, DJ, since we're kind of acting out of therapy, is that true? You have not seen your therapist for 2 to 3 months?
Correct.
Okay. So then I actually would say this because I wasn't sure if you were just making that up. Then I would actually say, DJ, I'm glad you're here and thanks for coming here and you're being proactive, but I would highly recommend that you do check in with your therapist though. As a therapist, if I know somebody wants to see me consistently, even if it's not about specifically their bipolar disorder diagnosis, because it can be well treated, with medication and well handled, I still want to check in. So I don't go over 2 weeks if I don't hear from them after 2 weeks, I just check in via email. So, and then sometimes it's okay. My clients don't respond back, but I might be a little pushy and then check in again until I get some sort of response to make sure that I'm doing my job. right? And checking
Mm-hmm.
in on them. That doesn't mean they need to come and see me. So,
Mm-hmm.
DJ, I think it's fine that you technically haven't seen your therapist in 2 to 3 months. That's fine. But as long as there's some sort of check in, either online or via the phone, I think that's important.
Okay. Well, thanks for the encouragement. I'll do that.
Good. Yeah. So then you coming in, and I guess after getting a sense of why you're coming in, then I'd say, well, specifically, you say you're not in crisis, but you feel like you still need to check in. What's the last week been like for you? What are some of the things that you felt like you needed to check in for that maybe you thought, hey, I would like to talk to a therapist about this.
Um, well, it's been a very mundane and routine uh, 11 months since we've been quarantined. Now, I've actually been working at home for 7 years, but pre-quarantine, I could actually get out of the house, and I would break up my day into half day at home and half day outside where I work at Starbucks or Chick-fil-A, just to have the ambient noise. And I need that to feel better and energized, because just being home alone is like solitary confinement.
Yeah.
And so
And actually, that's good
using
that you.
tools like Zoom and email and phone calls is very routine. So that part hasn't been stressful or triggering. Um, but work has been slower during quarantine due to some changes in our work strategy.
Hmm.
So, um, I think I've been doing pretty well. I know my energy level is probably a bit lower because
Mm.
I'm not working out. I used to work out twice a week at something called Orange Theory. And
I
so
know
that's
we're
a high
training.
intensity interval training.
Yeah.
And it's really nice to have a coach that motivates you to do your exercises. It's hard for me to just do it on my own, but those fitness centers are closed.
Yes.
And
So then how are
so,
you? I mean, I understand that because people were enjoying going to the gym and made it easy for them to work out. Uh, then I would say, what are you doing in its place that it doesn't mean you're working out every day, because let's be realistic,
hmm
it's harder, but
hmm
what are some things that you find like that you could be doing to get that energy? Because it is really important to release those happy hormones for the sake of well-being, even if things are fine. But you gave some hints like monotony
hmm
and all that humdrum stuff after a while can kind of lead to like a depressed mood. It doesn't mean you're depressed. It
hmm
just means a depressed
hmm
mood. Like,
hmm
is there more to life? Almost like living a Groundhog's Day, that movie, day
Yes.
after day. After a while, that's like can make anybody go crazy. I'm joking.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? So, yeah, what are some things you could do to get that energy back?
I'll
Think of
just take a walk outside my neighborhood for about half an hour,
that's
and that
good.
gets me the fresh air as well as the sun, as well as get my body moving. So one of the things I learned in my recovery over the past 4 years is just get my body moving. Because when
Yes.
I try to think of something to do, or try to think of what I should be doing or thinking about, I just get stuck. But if I
Mm,
move my body physically and breathe in fresh air, that actually changes my mindset.
yep.
So I
That's
try
good.
to, I really work at, that's my next step when I feel stuck or unsure or trying to figure out, just get my body moving.
So just to ask you, because that is a great solution, like, right? So 30 minutes active walking, and the people think working out has to be intense. Yes, hit training at Orange Theory was good. It doesn't have to be intense. You're walking, right? Which gets
Hmm.
that blood flowing. So I'm going to ask you this: when you said, "Oh, when I start walking, I get to thinking, things seem to be more clear." Do you know what's going on with your body when you're working out or walking? So this is a little mini test, but this is important of why it's good for your mental health.
Um, I'm not sure exactly because I'm not a biologist or physician, but I
Uh-huh.
do hear oxygen is like the very fundamental of how your brain works. Just
You
like
got it.
just as much as your heart needs oxygen, the more oxygen flows in you, the fresher your brain
So
can
you
work.
answered the question. I
Cool.
know I ask that at every workshop too, and I kid you not, everyone gets stressed out and they're silent. And I'm like, okay, this is not an exam. I'm just asking the question to get you thinking. But you're right. It's oxygen flowing to your brain that you need to help you think clearly, right? And what happens, so I'll tell you what happens when you're depressed or anxious. Your brain gets depleted of oxygen because think about what happens. Let's just give an
Mm,
example when you're stressed out. That's actually the
mhm,
typical thing. When someone's stressed out, you find yourself, you may not know this, but you're holding in your breath, like
mhm,
and then typing all these emails, all stressed out, right? Or talking to somebody on the phone and they're stressing you out, so you're holding your breath. Or you could be hyperventilating, being a little like,
mhm,
like, what do I do? What do I do?
mhm,
And I've seen it. I'm guilty of it, especially holding in the breath when we're stressed out.
mhm.
But guess what happens? Then your brain starts shutting down like this
Wow.
because it's like,
Mhm,
oh, I'm losing some oxygen that you're not giving me because you're not breathing effectively. So I'm just going to stop
mhm,
thinking. And then it
mm,
freezes basically. So then can
mhm.
you imagine, you know what happens when we're super stressed out? It's like a deer in the headlights. You stop
Yes,
thinking. So I tell
yes.
people that because I really see that the most in our Asian culture
Wow.
when we're
Mhm,
just in fact someone's talking to me on a Zoom call. Now it's all Zoom, I'm sorry, therapy
mhm,
platform, right? And I'm looking at them virtually and I kid you not, I can see them holding in the breath. Occasionally there'll be hyperventilation, but usually that's more of a traumatic event. But usually I see
yes.
like some parent starting to raise their voice to their child on the screen. When I say child, it could be a teen child or older child, and they're not even catching a breath, so they keep
Mhm,
viewing what I say, these angry words that happen when someone gets stressed out, and the brain starts shutting down more, and then you say things you don't mean and actually do things you don't.
yes.
So you see that a lot
Right.
in our Asian culture. Yeah.
Wow.
So
Yeah.
sometimes I'll literally interrupt. So if you were doing that, DJ, I'd be like, DJ, I need you to stop. Like I've actually stopped like family members and been like, stop, okay, stop, sorry, stop. And then they're like, what? And then they're completely discombobulated, like they have no idea that they were even in a session because they start saying stuff to each other and they're angry,
Mhm,
right? That's why they're in therapy.
mhm.
And then we literally practice a breathing exercise.
That's
So
good.
I mean, I was going to ask you to manage
Mhm.
your stress. What do you know about deep breathing, or what deep breathing techniques do you do?
I haven't added much more than that other than, um, going outside for a walk and focus on my breathing.
Well, that's good. At
Because
least you're
otherwise, if I don't focus on it, then I default to breathing rather shallow. And
yeah.
that's one thing I learned in my intensive exercise, that when I push my body, or when my coach pushed my body to run 6 miles an hour on the treadmill,
Oh my.
that I got to the point where, okay, if I push harder and breathe better, um, in a more rhythmic routine, I could actually get my body to keep up that pace.
Isn't
And
it amazing?
so,
Oxygen.
so my body functioned better, which also would tell me that my brain would work better if I learned to breathe better.
Yeah.
That's about all I do. I haven't done like other practices in breathing, but I've heard they're out there, and I've seen one of your videos where you did a good demo. So I add that
Yeah,
into the show
and
notes.
I teach that very diligently because I've seen some drastic changes immediately.
Mm,
So I'm going to ask you this. So you talked about how you haven't seen your therapist in 2 or 3 months. So I was going to ask you,
mhm.
how do you feel your therapy's going?
Well, it's excellent. I really like my therapist because they keep up with my thought pattern, and I don't have to explain so much of myself. So my therapist is Asian American, and I've worked and talked with non-Asians, and um, my therapist isn't as directive, so it gives me a lot of safe, supportive space to just process out loud. And then when I when they notice something, they'll say it, or when I ask for something, they'll say it. So it's a good rhythm of listening and talking
Mm.
that we've gotten accustomed to over the past 4 years, especially. Actually, I've been with them for 7 years.
Wow. So that brings me on. So I get this question a lot.
Mm.
Uh, it sounds like you still believe the therapist or the therapy that you're in is still quite effective. I mean, are you feeling challenged also in your therapy?
Um, I guess instinctive answer is no. I'm looking for support rather than challenge.
Okay.
And I know by nature I'm not a goal setter and achiever. And I want to make sure I'm supported before I go after something. And so when I'm supported and feeling well, then my creative energy kicks in, and then I can be productive and achieve some of those dreams. But if I have to start there, then I'm going to naturally shut down. I'm going to feel insecure and lack of confidence rather than trying to prove myself. So in that sense, I'm not the typical model minority.
Yeah, and I don't agree with that either, meaning there should be no typical. But I really shared because I was going to say then clearly, and this is a side note to people listening, then clearly you as the client are identifying what works for you. So I always go back. So we'll take a pause on this therapy session for a second, and I'll say to viewers and listeners that this is your therapy. So when people come to see me, it is not about me, right? I mean, I hope not. That would be terrible. But clients, for some reason, I've heard, not necessarily me, but when I get the questions in workshops like, but I feel like I should not say this to my therapist. And I'm like, what? I mean, I hope my clients can be honest with me, which they are, because a lot of them are Asian American, so they're pretty direct going, yeah, I don't like that, right? I want to do what works with obviously the boundary of like making sure that like I'm pushing the clients where they should be to get better and not just being stagnant. But then I also want the clients to know that if you feel like you can't speak up to your therapist, maybe think about that, because that's not safe either. I mean, the very thing I don't want for a client is they already have they're struggling outside of speaking to family members or whatever they're struggling with. And if you can't tell your therapist everything, then I might caution and say, why? Why do you feel that way? So I'm telling clients, you got to go in knowing and empower clients like you, DJ. This is your therapy. You better get what you want out of it, which is, you said support. You said it very well, feeling supported so I can get that creativity. So clearly you identified what works for you. So clients be able to identify what works for you. And if a therapy is not working for you, you'll know. And if you know and you're not feeling good about it, then you can move on. Like I tell people they can shop for a therapist. So one of actually the very first thing, I mean, not the very first thing I say, but in the first session, a lot of therapists, including myself, will say things like, hey, you need to speak up if it's not working for you. Don't worry about hurting my feelings. This is not about me. So I need to know if something's not working or you feel like you need to move on. Or you can just literally say, I don't want to, I want to cut ties on therapy, but I'll need to know why. Because if I feel like we're still in therapy, then it's okay to say, Jeanie, this isn't working. Now, I've only had that once, and that was with a 17-year-old kid. So it's not like I've heard that often. So I can't say that it feels good or bad. But I do tell my clients that. You know why? Because I want to make them feel safe from the get-go. Like, wow, okay, so this isn't about Jeanie. So if I say something completely, whatever, and I've gotten it. I've actually gotten them saying, okay, that's too much. I can't do that. I'm like, okay. But then I'll say, okay, but how about we try in a month? These are like assignments or something. So I hope I made that clear.
Yes.
Because I want
Yes.
clients to know that
Thank
this
you.
is their therapy.
Yeah. But for someone who hasn't had therapy, that's a really difficult thing to discern right on the first meeting or even the first 2 or 3. And then typically insurance give you 5 or 10 sessions and that's it.
Yeah. So there are more and more resources out there, like through like the directories out there, the BIPOC directories and everything. So that's good. But you're right. I mean, if there's a limited number through insurance or through your work that you get, I think that's unfortunate. But I really believe then if you find the right resources, like therapists like myself can find sources for you, in the that you're in. I believe that because we're working on that. That's what a lot of us are doing at the Asian Mental Health Collective and, Asians for Mental Health. Everybody trying and working these things. We're doing our best to serve the community. So I believe that's there. But you're right. If this is your first time in therapy, then even more, and I'll know that because guess what? Clients, therapists will have an intake form. So before you even come to see me, after you agree to therapy and sign a consent form, now it's all online. I give you this intake form via online Adobe platform, and you fill it out, and then I see it before I even see you. And I already have a good idea of what you're coming in for because a lot of my questions are very detailed. And then one of the questions is this your first time in therapy? So I'll even know that. And if it is, then I make it even more of a big topic to be like, okay, so you don't know what to expect. So let me tell you, but I also need you to know that if you feel uncomfortable, you should be able to express that, because
Hmm.
therapy in itself is already uncomfortable. Do you know what I'm saying? And it shouldn't add
Yes.
another layer of, I don't feel good about this therapist. And I've said that because
Yes.
it's like shopping for a therapist, shopping for a doctor. You know how you don't like a certain doctor? You're like, he did not have a good bedside manner, that kind of thing.
Hmm.
Therapists also can struggle with bedside manners, and depending on the personality
Hmm.
click.
Hmm.
Just because you're a therapist doesn't mean you click with everybody. Trust me, right?
Mm.
'Cause my style is very
Okay.
different from somebody else.
Yes.
So I do say that from the get-go,
Okay.
especially if it's your first time in
Good.
therapy.
Good. Thank you.
Yeah. So moving on to more about you.
Okay.
Well, what are some things that you're really enjoying being in the pandemic? I know it's been difficult, but what are some things that are fun for you?
Well, I'm eating well and I'm getting a lot of sleep.
Oh, that's nice.
So sleep is really important for me. That's like an anchor for me to reset my brain every night. And then
Hmm.
I take a nap. And then in the afternoon, um, and then Clubhouse has been a lot of fun during the past month. I've had access to chat with all kinds of people, both old friends and new friends.
Yeah.
So it's opened up more social interaction within the constraints of uh, quarantine.
I agree with you there. Now, so you saying you're eating well and then sleeping well. And tell me a little bit about your work background now. Are you more
Yes.
semi-retired, retired?
No, I'm working full. Uh, I'm a freelance contractor, but I'm underemployed. So I
Gotcha.
work with 3 different clients, and it's all technical work.
Hmm.
But what I really enjoy is working on my passion projects that don't pay. So this podcast, and then I started a second one called Asian American Christian Generosity, and so those things energize me and feel I have the satisfaction of giving back to my community.
Oh, yeah. So you said something really important that's really good for mental health, like a passion and a purpose.
Mm.
So I guess tell me about this. I mean, I know
Mhm.
this side note, I know we're being interviewed for the podcast, but why is this such a passion? What is it about this that you're doing that helps you, specifically this podcast?
Well, two things for me: podcasting and blogging, and doing a lot of things online,
Mhm.
going on 20 years now. First, I love trying new things, and the digital world is like sky's the limit. It doesn't cost anything, so you can just do it. Secondly, Enneagram 2, so I love giving, but the dark side of that is I'm blind to my self care, and so there are times when my energy is depleted, but I don't know it until I come crashing.
Mhm.
And so now with uh, therapy and more active self care, I'm more aware of setting boundaries and pacing myself. Specifically about erasing shame, it was actually a domain name. You can appreciate this with digital strategies. It was actually a domain name I registered in 2012, but I didn't launch a podcast until 2018 because I was looking for the right co host
Mm.
to have a conversation with me about areas of shame. Because for those of us that are Asian and Asian Americans, we're more than acquainted with shame, but we've never talked about it. And it's great. Brene Brown has popularized it through her TED Talks and her books and conferences in the American culture about shame, but she's a white woman. And there's something that doesn't quite connect at a visceral level for us as Asian and Asian Americans. So I figure if shame festers in silence, and the opposite of that is honest, healthy conversation, and I know technology and social media well enough, I'm like, okay, let's figure out how to start a conversation about shame amongst Asian Americans. And that through that process, we'll be erasing shame and people will be able to take the next step of courage and health for themselves and let them know that they're not alone. And here's what it looks like from a layman's perspective. That
Mm.
it's not just the experts talking now. We're just normal people struggling through life. And as we have special guests on, um, they're not always experts. They're the 99%, because the 1% already has their platform. But by sharing their experience with shame, that experience in and of itself begins to erase shame for them. And we've had guests on that get to experience that because it's the first time they've talked about something they haven't talked about. And they were ready to share. So it's been a very powerful medium.
By the way, and so there's my own therapeutic method for you as you were talking about erasing shame. Your demeanor changed. I don't know if you noticed that. I just saw
I didn't, but now that you call attention to it, I'm like, yeah, it energized me.
Yeah, it energized you. You like had a smile on your face, and then I guess something in your tone changed, and I was like in my head going, "Wow, he really is passionate." So I was going to just encourage you, saying, obviously, keep it up because it's good for your own mental health. Not just talking about shame and bringing attention to it and erasing it through your work, but the fact that you do this and get to meet all these other people, and through it, it's like a therapeutic process for yourself. That's cool.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Cool.
And then your other one that you just I guess you started a new one too, Asian American Christianity, generosity.
Yes.
Yeah, so I'm seeing your core values here. By the way, Brene Brown says that too. And but core values, it really does help us with our identity, regardless of that's Brene Brown's thing, but even you got to know your core values. So clearly I'm hearing your Asian culture, addressing shame, and then you mentioned your Asian American Christianity podcast. So tell me about that.
Yes, we just started a month ago, and I'm talking with a donor development guy who's a friend for about 10 years, more than 10 years. But before I met him, I worked 10 years in a small private family foundation. So I got to see this world of the nonprofit upside down, where we were giving grants and evaluating nonprofit effectiveness. And the statistics tell us that Asian Americans and Asian American Christians have an enormous amount of wealth. Not all of them, but some of them. But that wealth is not activated in terms of community development, community service. And I'm 54 now, so I'm realizing there's peers of mine that have wealth, but they don't know how to give beyond tithing to the church or giving to missions or giving to buildings. And so there's dreams that people younger than myself have that philanthropy and generosity can really activate. And it's also been part of my journey, not just from working in the foundation, but also for our family, that generosity has brought us a lot more joy and freedom than just buying things. And so we want to create a conversation around that because money's hard to talk about, again, for Asians. And so just talking about it, I think, starts the snowball rolling.
It's so hard to talk about. It's so funny, but yet it's hard to talk about. But then you get blunt questions from Asian American elders, like, "How much money do you make?" Right? Like, "What's your salary?" And you're sitting there like, "Oh my gosh!" And it's so Asian to get asked those very direct questions, but then yet we don't talk about things. Isn't that like the irony, the paradox of our culture?
Yes. Yes.
Cool.
That's right.
So then I guess even as we're going through this, by the way, this is all part of the therapy process. I ask what people are passionate about, what they normally do, to see how their demeanor changes. And then being a solution-focused therapist, I focus on that. I'll be like, well, clearly I'm looking at his face and he just lit up talking about it. So clearly I have to make sure he continues doing this for his own mental health, So it's not rocket science, right? I wish I could say, yeah, it's a magic pill. I know exactly. No, I actually listen to the client and watch them. And that's the other thing. Virtually speaking, when I'm looking at the camera, opposed to seeing somebody in the room, it was a little bit of an adjustment, And sometimes I would have to say to the client, okay, I need you to make sure, can you make sure you're on camera and you're looking at me?
Yes.
Because I know it's a bit of an adjustment. But yeah, so that said, how often, so just continue a little bit of the therapy process before we debrief, how often do you think about your mental illness? Like how much of it does it define your day? I guess I want to have you talk a little bit about what it's like for you.
Well, when I'm doing well, I don't think about it at all. So I can go on autopilot and cruise control. And that's where I like to be, where I don't have to think about it. And when I say I don't think about it, that doesn't mean that I don't do the things I need to do for self-care. So when I'm in autopilot, I take my medication in the morning and in the evening. I'm aware of when the afternoon's coming, and I'm attuned to my body when it needs to take a nap. And then I'm conscious about getting to sleep on time. And then I know I have enough sleep when I can wake up without an alarm clock. So that's how I kind of let my body tell me when I'm rested. And so those are kind of the main things I keep in check. The thing I've started noticing over the past month or so is I've started losing appetite, but I will still eat just a little bit to keep my body in rhythm, even though I don't feel like I'm really hungry. So I do keep that. I'm not a snacker, so it's not being disrupted per se from bad eating.
Well, you just focus
And
on
then
health. So when you're doing well, it's about being on autopilot. What are the days when you're not doing well?
So when I'm not doing well, then I'm going to my journal and journaling to get the thoughts out of my head, because otherwise I feel like I'm either getting spiraling down or being overwhelmed or stuck. And so those things are signals to me that I'm not doing well when I'm stuck or spiraling or overwhelmed.
Yeah.
Then I need an outlet. Typically, my first outlet is to journal. Second one is to just get outside and walk. And then I try to think, okay, what else am I supposed to do? I have a written checklist. Okay, call a friend. And then if I'm still stuck for a day or two, then call my therapist.
Gotcha. Well, but so to clarify, since you haven't really seen your therapist for 2 or 3 months, it sounds like you have been doing pretty good.
I haven't journaled all year. So I'm like, there's been some good memories this year that I want to write down.
Huh, that's it. Well, there you go. See, what I look at is when things are going well and what you're doing. So, what was going on this year besides COVID, but that you didn't journal all year, meaning you were doing pretty good? Because I just asked you when things are not good, you journal. So it sounds like
Yes.
it's been a really good year.
Yes. But it's been slow. So that part I actually don't like. But maybe being slow actually helps me regulate. So that's a connection I didn't make because I've been focused on all things are so slow. I wish there was some action I could get into.
Yeah.
But now as we're talking about this, the aha has kind of come. It's like, well, maybe that slowness helps me to stay autopilot without overstressing my system.
Well, it sounds like something, which is what I was asking you, because when I asked you when the last time you journaled, or you just said you haven't journaled in a while, I'm like, well, I'm putting two and two together, and something's going good for the past year. So maybe it's slowness, yeah, or and maybe you'll figure that out. But it's good to identify that, because that's the key question I ask. When things are going well, what's going on? Like, what are you doing to have it continue on like that? And just tell me you just didn't journal for a while. I'm like, wow, that's a big deal.
Thank you.
Yeah,
cool.
Because people are saying through COVID they're struggling like they've never struggled before, or you do see some doing better. You do see some people doing better, but you with a mental illness, a mental health disorder diagnosis, clearly doing well in the pandemic tells you something. So I would do a little bit more digging to figure out why you're doing well.
Okay.
Because post-pandemic, it's going to be a key question to keep that up. Despite things changing, you can still keep your well-being intact.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. I'll bring that to my therapist. I know there's things that are unconscious in me that by talking with a therapist in a safe place, because I don't have any other safe places, that it helps me bring it to consciousness. And then when, to quote the great Mr. Rogers, what can be mentioned can be managed.
Yeah, that's true. And maybe you just answered it by saying, maybe I slow down and it has helped me. So I guess to technically wrap up our fake short session, I was going to say this, a key to preventing trauma, actually, because I want to say that this during this pandemic, technically we're being traumatized. I mean, it's like living through a pandemic. So who's lived through a pandemic unless you've lived through 1932 flu or 1918 flu? Nobody really, right? So I like to point out that technically this is a traumatic time, but to to make sure you continue preventing traumatic symptoms is exactly what you're doing, DJ, which is every day of walking. And you said it, you said making sure that I'm moving. So basically that term is like feeling the physical agency of grounding, like feeling like we're in tune with our bodies. And that's actually, believe it or not,
Okay.
super important. So you're preventing some trauma right now in yourself by doing that. But people don't know that. People underestimate little things like walking. I'm like, going out walking. I'm like, please don't do that, because it just grounds you with your own body and smells. And all of a sudden you're like, oh, okay, let me be back to reality here. This is where I'm at. It's a tough time. I'm in control. But yeah, that's a huge factor in preventing trauma. So I just want to share that. So you're doing, that's what I'm
Thank
saying.
you.
Keep that up. To keep doing that. As a therapist, I would
Thank
say
you.
that too. Like
Thank
make
you,
it
Jeanie.
even after. So
All right. Well, thank you,
yes,
Jeanie. It's wonderful talking with you.
yeah, I really enjoyed it, and I feel like there in this particular session, DJ, because I'm pretty direct, I do feel like you are doing well, and I think it's right to say that. I think it's good to say that. You know, as a
Thank
therapist,
you. I'm glad I passed.
yeah, yeah. So, well, maybe we'll do another one in a month, and you may not pass. No, I'm kidding. But yes, thank you for coming. This was great.
Great. Thank you. That's so cool. Thank you
Yeah.
for explaining things along the way.
Yeah, because I was gonna say, therapy doesn't always have to be this grinding of like emotions, right? Because I want to, I mean, if you were gonna go that route because of something you were sharing, then I would go that way.
Mm,
But clearly you were
mhm,
not, you were doing well. And so I think
mhm.
that's important to point out as my job as a
Good.
therapist to continue pointing that
Yes.
out, that you are doing well. Because
Yes.
sometimes people, especially Asians, are so are so hard on themselves, you know?
Yes.
And so I always try to, the word I like to use, which people always like to say, is self-compassion, but we really are not self-compassionate creatures, Asians.
Correct.
So
Right.
when I can commend somebody for doing well, I try to do my best to do it,
Yes.
because you don't hear
Well,
it a lot.
that's certainly my backstory all the way through my 40s, even that I didn't have compassion myself, even though I gave a lot of compassion to others. And that
Yeah,
was such an
we're good
irony.
with that. But we're good
Okay.
with that. We're so good on, like, there's a Korean term for it, but like the Korean term is like charejo, which means we're so good at taking care of others, like coddling others.
Mm,
We don't even know how to do it to ourselves, because
mhm.
I think our culture is very collective that way. So it's not about
Yes.
individual, right? It's about the group. But I
Yes.
also point out that that can be harmful too, to the sake of our mental
Hmm.
health, you know? So yeah,
Yes.
which is why I'm passionate about, API mental health.
Yes.
Yeah. So this is cool. So that's awesome. Yeah.
What?
And but when people come in, so I don't always have a good session like that. And when we're
Hmm.
talking about erasing shame, you're so right. Shame, guilt. I'm trying to think of the main factors I see. Shame, guilt, saving face. Those three I tend to
Hmm.
see a lot of, like, showing face and saving face. Okay, I got to make sure, that nobody knows that these problems I have, right? And then that all builds up, and
Hmm.
a lot of that has to do with the shame they may feel because of the way
Hmm.
intergenerationally, the things that we're taught. So I see that a lot in Asian families, Asian American families too. And I feel like erasing shame is going to take a lot of work, but it's possible. Even talking about it is the first step. Even admitting you feel shamed. You're like, yeah, I feel
Hmm.
shamed by sharing this. Sometimes I'm like, that's amazing you just said that.
Hmm.
Because even sharing it openly is the first step in erasing
Hmm.
shame.
Hmm.
Because when you admit it, it's actually not bad. It's like
That's good.
holding shame, I feel like, is a whole internal thing. But if we externally express it, it's so much better for us. But yeah, so that's like a lifelong work, teaching Asian Americans how to unlearn shame. Like even
Sure.
myself, it's like I'm constantly learning that, right? So just to tell you, I think that I wrote a book, right? So the book I
Yeah, you
literally
got a book coming out, and so this episode will literally be released right around the date your book releases. So tell us about the book.
Yeah, how cool. Thanks. That was like a good segue. Anxiety is the word I use a lot, threaded throughout my book, because I want to blast that word. Because I say the word anxiety and I can look at someone's face and they're like, did you just say that?
Hmm.
Especially Asians, right? Especially Asian parents. They're like, oh,
Mm.
no, 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 we're not anxious. And then, in my head, I'm cracking up. I don't show that I'm always cracking up because I don't think that's polite. But in my behind my exterior, I'm like cracking up, going, "That's so funny." They remind me of my own parents, but then yet they're my age. So technically, it's interesting how the generations over time they still show the same patterns. And shame and anxiety, it's all like lumped into a sum of like a circle. But yeah, my book is literally breaking down my own upbringing without
Mhm.
exaggerating, because I know that some people have had more traumatic upbringings, but trauma doesn't have to be dramatic. It doesn't have to be this
Mhm.
terrible abusive event. It could be seriously continual conflict over time that becomes traumatic because you're constantly facing it. So for me, what became my trauma was the fact that I couldn't even share anything in my family, right?
Mhm.
I didn't know as a kid what that was like. I remember constantly, it's like imagining like you're a shadow. So you're there and you see a shadow, but then you're just a shadow of yourself. Like, so it's almost like bleak and black. That sounds so dark.
Mhm.
And I don't mean to sound that way, but I just brought it to light. I basically just shed a spotlight on the stigma of mental health without blasting our culture, because I want to be healthy about it, because I'm
Mhm.
proud to be Asian American. I can say that now, right? But I didn't used to always say that. So growing up, I'd be like, can I just be like Barbie? How you wanted to be like, I wanted to be
Mhm.
blonde
Mhm.
and tall and have blue eyes. Now, I mean, now, obviously, just because I'm just more comfortable in my own skin, I can't imagine saying that. I'd be like, no,
Mhm.
you know, but you don't, as growing up in a tough Asian household, nobody wants to be living like that. So I think why I shed light on it is for the current families I work with and families future, we have to break those patterns. You got to be able to let your kid
Yes.
express some emotions. And and I'm a parent now, but I'm being very authentic. I'm still unlearning some behaviors of my past. So sometimes I have to practice asking my kids, "You look stressed." And now I can say, "What's stressing you out?" Man, my parents
Mm.
would have never asked me. I mean, I don't even think they even
Mhm.
knew that I was stressed, because they don't even know what to look for. But I was
Mhm.
clearly stressed growing up with certain things, but could never tell them. Or even be honest, I even talked about how I couldn't even express happiness. You
Mm.
just can't even express like, "Hey, this is so
Mhm.
cool.
Mhm.
I won this." I don't know, not like a cheerleading competition. I forget. I won this cool competition. Oh, I can't really tell my parents that because that's what they expect of me. Oh well. Do you know what I mean? That's
Yeah.
sad. So now with my
Mhm.
kids, I want them to show that they're excited about something that they achieved and not
That's
make it
great.
feel like, duh, that's what you should have done. Does that make sense? And so I really
Yes, that's great.
my best to I call myself, it's in the book too. I call myself, and it's going to be in my parenting book, Tiger Mom 2.0. So why I say that is because Tiger Mom doesn't sound good, but clearly I still grew up with like a tiger parenting. So it's a lot of that behavior still in me, but I'm
Mhm.
constantly reconciling it, like constantly fighting it.
Wow.
So instead of saying, because there are times my kids have said, "Oh, I got this grade," I'd be like, "You could have done better." I mean, you know what I mean? I'm just a normal parent. So I'll be like, "Did I just say he could have done better when his grade was actually pretty good?" So the 2.0 version of me is I actually say something like, "No, never mind. No, that's good. No, that's awesome. Yeah, yeah, forget what I said. I've actually said that." And then they're like, "Okay."
That's great.
And then they come back to me next time going, "Well, I tried harder." And like I said, these are good grades. It's not like an F. Do you know what I mean? It's
Yes.
like a good grade. And I still
Yes.
say things like, "Well, you could have gotten 95." And that is what parents said to me. So I am trying to be realistic in my book of not saying, let's try to be perfect now and change and be different than our parents. That's not possible. Then I'm actually
Mhm.
perpetuating like the model minority, to be honest with you. We're not supposed to be
That's great.
perfect. We're just supposed to
Mhm.
acknowledge that we have these imperfections of our culture that we're constantly trying to work on and unlearn. And I believe we can do it. It's just that
Thank you.
the previous generations don't know how to, but we do.
Thank you.
Americans can,
Yes.
because we have the
Yes.
culture. So that's my
Well,
book.
it's it's so helpful to share these principles in a story because in a story they come alive and then we can relate to it. So it sounds like it's a good blend of your own story and your journey
Yeah.
along with some others, and
Hmm.
then some things that help you unlearn and become more healthy.
Yeah.
Now, will the book be available digitally as well as print?
Yes. In fact, on March 11th, the little plug
Mhm.
whenever this comes out, it
Yes.
will be we'll be doing a special that day for digitally. So it'll be super, super inexpensive. My all Asian peeps
Great.
trying to get a good deal. I'm trying to do that for you. I
Thank
don't mind
you.
admitting things like that. That's what I
Well,
love about
we'll
our culture.
release this right a few days before that, so
Yeah,
people can
so
join
on
in.
March 11th, you'll
Mhm.
shout out and maybe DJ. You know what? Maybe I'll do a clubhouse talk that day, and you just come and join me. We'll just
That would
like
be
do a little
awesome.
quick, yeah, because by then
Thank you.
people will be able to get it digitally, so they could like start reading it. I'm very proud of it, but I'll be honest with you, I'm nervous because it's like
Mm,
not about it doing well. I'll admit that take away the saving face and showing face. It's more about me being very vulnerable and bringing to light mental health in a real way, not in a fiction book. This is nonfiction,
mm,
real
mm,
memoir. So I'm like,
mhm,
oh, like that's my
mhm.
whole life. But it's okay because I
Yeah.
want people to see what I experienced too. So I think that's where I can get the empathy because I do empathize with a lot of parents, the first generation, because I understand that, but then I'm also a parent. So I can empathize with all grades, and it's important to understand that that's what my book's about, for just to show that understanding that I know what they're going through.
So cool. As we wrap up, go ahead and tell us about Nuna's Nunchi and
Yeah.
Asian Mental Health Collective. You just had a tremendous conference called Transformation,
Yeah.
and you raised some money for mental health. And
Yes.
it is phenomenal what you and your team are doing there.
Well, okay, so let's start with Asian Mental Health Collective. I can't take all the credit. I literally came on board. They had asked me to be their executive director, but I declined because I'm so busy with my own work, but I'm the president and chairman of the board. So I definitely will be able to help that way because I believe in their mission. They did it all themselves. And in fact, sometimes I'd be like, do you need any help? I don't know how to help you because you guys are super doing the awesome work. So they did awesome. And I am super proud to help them. Where they needed me was just to help them lead with strategy and kind of formulate this organization because they've grown. And to be part of that is amazing, you know? And so I think it's amazing that they have this now. I would have benefited from 30 years ago, right? I would have loved to be a youth looking at the Asian Mental Health Collective. So that's my work there. A huge, I would say, mission project, but I shouldn't even say that because it's going to be a big deal. And I'm super proud to start that organization with them. And then Nuna's Nunchi came about because I work with a lot of college students, Asian American college students who, by the way, are underserved. Just had to make a plug there, and
Hmm.
especially on campuses when it's still very much white, so they don't understand Asian mental health. So I just happen to be a resource. I'm in North Carolina. I'm right next to Duke, UNC Chapel Hill, NC State, all these universities that have come to reach out to me. So it makes my work a little busy, but I had such compassion because they remind me of me, and I was like, oh my gosh, you're having the
Hmm.
same experience I did. So that's why I finished the book in 2020. I had started it years ago, and actually I almost was like, who wants to read no, I'm not famous. Who wants to read my book? But because of these young kids, I'm like, let me finish my book so it can be
Hmm.
helpful. But Nuna's Nunchi came about as an offshoot of that. I would actually talk to a lot of college students and be like, so there's this K drama. Do you watch K dramas? And then they'd be like, yes. I'd be like, oh, okay. So let me talk about this one scene in this K drama. And they would just look at me like, I get it. So what I was trying
Hmm.
to do was make these mental health connections
Hmm.
based on what they were watching on TV or Netflix and connecting it for them, because I'd be like, so this is how you should talk to your parents. This is a good example. I would always try to show them good examples and then show them bad examples, going, not pointing out, going, this is a bad example, but pointing out to parents going, I don't want you to do this to your kids. Don't sit there yelling at them, saying these mean things, but then go behind their back and you're really crying for them. They need to see you crying for them, So
Hmm.
I would just use it. And now it's become such a big part of my work that it's not about Asians anymore. Non-Asians love K-dramas.
Hmm.
So
Yes.
I talk to a lot of African American students that they're like, Jeanie, can I talk to you about this K-drama? And I love it. So it has opened doors for me to see the intersectionality, to be honest with you, between Asians,
Hmm.
blacks, whites, basically Asian, black, and white, because all of them can
Hmm.
intersect the love of K-dramas, and that's how I'm normalizing mental health. So that's Nuna's
That's
Nunchi.
beautiful.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Jeanie. Really appreciate all that you do and giving of yourself. Congratulations on your new book.
Thank
And we'll
you.
continue talking about erasing shame and bringing health to our community so that we can all enjoy the life that God's blessed us with.
Thanks so much. It was a pleasure. It was
You.
so easy to talk to you. I could come back every week and do this.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Erasing Shame podcast. Check out our website at erasingshame.com. We would love to hear your comments and questions. Please subscribe on any podcast app like Apple, Google, Spotify, or on Facebook and YouTube. And please add a rating, a review, and a share so more people can experience the freedom and healing that comes from erasing shame.